Hey guys, welcome to EMT 101, Central EMS EMT-B Classic. This is lecture number 2. We're delving into the anatomy and physiology of the circulatory system. That'll be the heart and the veins, the arteries, vessels, and how everything gets its blood flow. So I just want to welcome you back and hope you enjoyed the first lecture and starting to get adjusted to the flipped classroom format. Um, we have to adapt and overcome, or we would overcame. I much prefer the traditional format where I can see you, talk to you, pick on you, and have a good time. But this is going to give you a lot more free time to to handle your business. And you can pause me, you can rewind, you can do whatever you need to do. All right. So if y'all ready, I'm ready. So to begin with, I'm going to share my screen here with you. All right. Here we go. So we're going to start with the circulatory system, the cardiac anatomy. So there are some big main objectives I want you to take from this lecture. This was part of a paramedic style lecture that I give to my Fortis College paramedic students and my students at the Atlanta Fire Department. But I have condensed it down to a more digestible format for you, the EMT-B, because while there's nothing wrong with knowing more and more and more, this lecture was originally built towards the paramedic level of understanding for pathophysiology and anatomy. So I've condensed it to give you just the hard facts. I've trimmed all the fat out, so this just be facts. And again, your book, your lectures that you're getting, these are just facts and figures. What the flipped classroom model is supposed to give you is a context and to facilitate you to learn in a self-paced environment. With the Delta variant and COVID still being a thing, we're just not sure what the futures hold. So we're trying to adapt and do more of an online format for us and for you. We want to keep you safe and keep ourselves safe. All right, so starting off, we need to talk about some objectives I have for this. So I want you to be able to describe the location of the heart and its relationship to other structures in the body. Where it at though? Why is it there? So we're going to describe where the heart's at. We're going to name the chambers of the heart and the vessels that enter or leave each chamber. We're going to trace the pathway of blood cell through the body. We're going to trace the pathway of blood cells that go through the body and through the heart. We're going to name the valves of the heart and their functions. All right. So the heart itself is a muscular cone-shaped organ. It's cone-shaped. It has a little point on it. It's called the apex. It is cone-shaped that pumps blood throughout the body. It's about the size of a closed fist. Okay, lies within the mediastinum between the lungs. You got two lungs, one on each side, and between them bad boys is the heart right here. It lies 2/3 of its mass on the left side of the human body. It is not directly in the center. There's some of it in the center, but 2/3, the majority of it, does lie on the left side of the chest. So we have a couple terms to describe layers of the heart. If you ever seen the movie Shrek, ogres have layers, don't you? So the heart has layers too. So the heart itself has the endocardium being the beginning layer. It is the most intimate layer of the heart. It's endocardium. So the endocardium is the innermost layer. Next, you have the myocardium. In medical terminology, myo means muscle. So the muscle of the heart, cardium, of course, will mean heart. So myocardium will be the heart muscle itself. And then we have the epicardium. Epicardium being the epi meaning outside. So this is the outer layer of the heart. And then it's all surrounded by the what? The pericardium, peri meaning around. So there is a sac that the heart just sits in. I know they didn't tell you that, possibly didn't tell you that in science class back in high school, but it's very true. There is a sac that surrounds the heart and it cushions it and protects it and also lubricates it as it moves around. So in this diagram here, we have a picture of where the heart's at. It lies again 2/3 on the left side of the chest. There is a condition called dextrocardia where the heart's actually on the right side of the chest. It's kind of a rare thing. I haven't seen it but once in my career. So, I mean, but it is possible and it does happen. But for the majority of people, it is on the left side of the chest. Surrounded by bone. We have not covered skeletal anatomy yet, but when we do, you will find that bones, that they have a purpose. They're not just there to look cool. Bones, part of their purpose is to protect and house vital organs. So the heart lies there. Pericardium, again, is a thick fibrous membrane sac that surrounds the heart. What does peri mean? It's around. So it surrounds the heart, anchors the heart within the mediastinum, prevents over distension. Over distension, that means it cannot swell and burst out because the pericardium protects it from doing that. And then we have the serous pericardium. It's an inner membrane of the pericardium that contains two layers, a visceral layer and a parietal layer of the pericardium. So those are the two that are doing that. So when we talk about the visceral and parietal layer, this is something that most organs of the body have, right? So let's say the heart itself. It is the epicardium that is the visceral layer. That is the layer that covers the organ itself, right? That is the outer layer that covers the organ itself. The parietal layer is the one that covers the chest wall or the pericardial sac itself. Same thing applies to the lungs. The lungs have a visceral layer covering them, and then the outside of the chest wall is lined with the parietal layer. The way we used to remember this back when I taught it before was that parietal starts P-A-R-I, Paris. So Paris is very far from Georgia. So that's the one that's farther away. That analogy may not work if you live in Paris, but for over here, us in OGA, that's going to be just fine. So remember, the parietal, Paris, is the farther one away. And the one that actually lines the organ itself is the visceral layer. So the heart has 4 chambers, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 chambers. That is a test question. It has 4 chambers. The upper 2 chambers, the smaller ones are called the atria, and the bottom ones are called the ventricles. Those are the big guys. So the atria is the upper 2 chambers of the heart. They're divided from left to right by the intra-atrial septum. Septums divide. You've got septum in your heart, you've got septum in your nose, left from right nostril. So the membrane that separates the atria is called the intra-atrial septum. Each atria receives blood from where? All other parts of the body. Blood, after it's been out and about doing its thing, oxygenating tissues, it will return back to the right side of the heart. Ventricles are my big boys. They are the lower 2 chambers of the heart. And the intraventricular septum is the wall that separates the right from the left ventricles. All the ventricles do is they do what? They pump blood out of the heart. The right ventricle will pump blood to the lungs for it to be oxygenated. The left ventricle will do what? It'll pump blood throughout the rest of the body. Those guys are divided by a septum as well. They're divided by a septum as well. So then we have the AV valves. There are 4 valves in the heart. 4 valves in the heart: the tricuspid, the pulmonic, the mitral, and the aortic valve. That is the valves in the heart, and that is the valves going in order as blood flows through the heart. A little mnemonic I tell students about is tricuspid, pulmonic, mitral, aortic. That's TPMA. That's toilet paper, my anus. Toilet paper, my anus. So tricuspid, pulmonic, mitral, and aortic valve. That's a way to remember the valves of the heart, and they're in order. The AV valves, as you might have already ascertained, is atrioventricular valves. Those are the valves that separate the upper and lower chambers of the heart. So there's 2 of those, and there's 2 semilunar valves. Those are located between the ventricles and the arteries. So blood enters the right atrium. Okay, we're going to talk about the path of blood through the heart here in a minute, but all blood that is pumped out of the left side of the heart goes throughout the body. It oxygenates tissue, and tissue is very important to be oxygenated. If I was to take a string and tie it around my finger, it would turn red, then blue, then purple, then black, and die off. It would be necrotic, and the tissue would die. From all the way down to even a cellular level, your cells require oxygen, glucose, water to create energy, adenosine triphosphate. So that ATP that's created needs those things for it to happen. If they don't get it, the cells will begin to die off and become acidic and create a lot of havoc for you, the organism, right? So blood flow has to happen. So the left side of the heart pushes blood throughout the body systemically. The right side receives that unoxygenated blood, because once you send blood out and it oxygenates tissue, it is now unoxygenated blood. It comes back to the right side of the heart. And that blood enters the right side of the heart via the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, and the coronary sinus. Superior, we learned from our last lesson, means above. The above, so the anything close towards the head. So the top of the body is draining of blood. My head, my eyes, my ears, my scalp, all this stuff. After it's oxygenated my tissue here, it goes right back to the right side of the heart. And that tissue, all of that, those veins and venules dump back into vena cava. They're much bigger veins. And those vena cava, remember, veins carry unoxygenated blood, arteries carry oxygenated blood. Veins carry unoxygenated blood, arteries carry oxygenated blood. So those veins are carrying that unoxygenated blood back to the heart, so the heart can send it through the lungs to be oxygenated back up, so the left side of the heart can throw it right back out into circulation. It works off of a loop. So real quick, blood goes round and around, air goes in and out, and any deviation is bad juju, right? I remember hearing that years ago, thinking it was quite funny, but it always stuck with me. So coronary sinus and the inferior vena cava. So the superior vena cava, it drains the top of the body. Inferior, remember that's closer to the feet, drains the lower part of the body. So superior is above, inferior is below. So both of those, the top and the bottom of the body, are drained of blood, and it's going back to the right atrium. Now, the heart is an organ. It is made up of cells, and just like any organic tissue, it needs what? It needs blood flow. Just because it pumps blood, don't mean it doesn't need blood. So the heart itself has to have blood flow too, and it gets that blood flow via the coronary arteries. The coronary arteries are what give the heart blood flow itself. Now, just like every artery, there is a vein that drains. Every artery has a vein that is named similarly that drains. Let's say the coronary arteries give the heart blood itself. The coronary sinus drains the blood back from the heart muscle after the heart wall has used it and been oxygenated. All right. So now I'm going to take a pause break from screen sharing. And I'm going to go to our little whiteboard here, share that. All right, so the whiteboard here, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the path of blood through the heart. So after I give you a visual here, you might understand it a little better. So this, of course, is not the anatomical heart, but this seems to be an easier format for students to know how to trace the path of blood through the heart. So how many chambers does the heart have? That's right, 4 of them. Not 1, not 2, but 3, but 4. There are 4 chambers in the heart, okay? So with that happening, we have 3 structures that we talked about bringing blood back to the heart. 1, 2, 3. So the top one is superior vena cava. That bottom guy, inferior vena cava. Who was the middleman that drains the heart of blood itself? That is the coronary sinus. Now that blood all comes back to the right side of the heart. This is the right atrium, left atrium, left ventricle, right ventricle. What do atria do? They receive blood, right? So this blood comes back to the right atrium via the coronary sinus, the superior and inferior vena cavas. Then the right atrium pushes it through a valve. You know what valves do? They prevent blood from flowing backwards the way it's not supposed to. That's what valves do. So the first valve of the heart is the tricuspid valve. Put a little T right there. All right. And the tricuspid valve, then there's the pulmonic. I'm writing it over here for you. So we have a little mnemonic to remember that. Remember, toilet paper, my anus. Tricuspid, pulmonic, mitral, and aortic. That is the path of blood through the heart's valves in order. So the tricuspid valve is this first guy over here. Blood then flows down into the right ventricle. The right ventricle then pumps it out through another valve. That'd be your who? Your pulmonic valve. I'll put a little P right here for you. Pulmonic valve pumps it into the lungs, and we haven't covered respiratory anatomy yet, so I won't get too deep into that. I want you to focus on the heart. The lungs will then perform diffusion and oxygenate this blood. The blood will become oxygenated, and now we will bring it back to the left side of the heart. There are 4 pulmonary veins that bring that oxygenated blood back to the left atrium, okay? The left atrium then pumps that blood through another valve. What do valves do? They prevent blood from backflowing the way it's not supposed to go. So it goes right here through the, put a big M, mitral valve. Now the mitral valve is also known as the bicuspid valve because it has 2 little cusps on it, okay? Either is an acceptable answer, but some people call it bicuspid, some people call it mitral. For my mnemonic, my little analogy thing here to work or whatever it's called, I need you to call it a mitral. So toilet paper my anus. So tricuspid pulmonary, we're at the mitral valve, blood is pushed into the left ventricle. Now, the left ventricle is a big, thick, muscular portion of the heart. It's the biggest one. Why? He's the one that does the majority of the work. He's going to pump that blood throughout the rest of the body. Every pump he gives is going to push it out all the way to the rest of your body. So that blood is now in the left ventricle. He pushes it out through the aortic valve there. And that is the path of blood through the heart. So it goes from inferior, superior vena cava, coronary sinus, unoxygenated blood comes to the right atrium, goes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, goes out to the pulmonic valve. It'll then hit the lungs, become oxygenated, go back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. That left atrium then pushes that blood through the mitral or bicuspid valve. You put it back into the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps it out through the aortic valve. That is where the rest of that body gets blood flow from. Not bad, huh? So you guys have got that figured out. Again, if you need to rewind me and do that again, I would love for you all to take a minute and to actually draw this out yourself a couple of times. That repetition will build memory. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, because I love you and all, that this is going to be one of your test questions. I'm not going to ask you to draw it just yet, but I will. But I'm going to ask you to path of blood through the heart in a paragraph style question. So if you're watching the videos and not skimming through them, you will know that you're prepared for your little quiz that's due by Sunday at midnight. It would turn into a pumpkin, right? All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop all that, stop my sharing and come back here. Now we're gonna screen share again, go back to our little PowerPoint. Ooh, be back, baby. So now that we've seen the path of blood through the heart, we can see that the tricuspid valve separates the right atrium from the right ventricle. Those are called AV valves. Why? Atrioventricle, AV, there's an A above and a V below. The tricuspid right between them. He's an AV valve. Can you name the other AV valve? You're probably thinking, yeah, that's the mitral valve or the bicuspid. Well, daggone, you guys are smart. So that is correct. The AV valves are the tricuspid and the mitral or bicuspid valves. So about the pulmonary valve, that has three cusps. He pumps blood into the lungs. So we've already kind of covered that with the drawing, so I'm not going to beat you to death with that. So continuing on, we do have things called the chordae tendineae. These are the small muscular strands that attach to the ventricles and the valves. They're connected by papillary muscles, and when they pull, it causes the heart to expand and contract, expand and contract. As it expands, when it contracts back together, is when it squishes blood out. And when the papillary muscle contracts, these strands tighten, preventing regurgitation of blood through the valves. You do not want blood to go back the way it's not supposed to. Do not want that to happen. All right, so those are our AV valves, atrioventricular valves, mitral, and tricuspid. They separate the atrium ventricles. That's a test question. I am too helpful. I'm gonna stop doing something. All right, so the right atrium receives, we've already covered that. I'm not gonna beat you to death with all this PowerPoint stuff if I can help it. Cool. So abnormal heart sounds and normal heart sounds. S1 and S2 are normal. S1 and S2 are normal. When those valves of the heart we talked about, the tricuspid and pulmonic and the mitral and aortic, when they are opening and closing, they make noise. So if any doctor or you're going to listen to somebody's heart sounds, it's supposed to be just lub-dub, lub-dub, doop, 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 doop. That's the normal heart sounds. And sometimes there are different abnormal heart sounds that can occur, but the easiest way to learn what abnormal is to listen to a bunch of normal heart sounds. When you listen to a bunch of normal heart sounds, you can then understand by pattern recognition that this is abnormal. This is abnormal. The same thing applies to listening to lung sounds. You learn what normal sounds like, then you can hear what abnormal sounds like. You can tell if they're junky lungs filled with fluid, congestion, or if they're wheezing or something like that. And same thing applies to the heart. If there's an abnormal sound, you can detect it by pattern recognition of knowing what normal sounds like. S1, that lub-dub, that do-do, that is normal sounds. Okay. S3 and S4 are not heard in individuals with normal heart sounds. They're a little bit abnormal. So let's talk about it. S3 is normally associated with heart failure. S3 is what we normally associate with heart failure, but it can occur in young athletes and it is a natural phenomenon. In older individuals, it does indicate the presence of possible heart failure. It does indicate the presence of possible heart failure. It kind of sounds like a gallop. So like we got love dub, do 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 do. This guy sounds like do 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 do. I'm probably doing that terribly, but it'll be a third sound that you hear after love dub that's abnormal. It's not meant to be there. Now again, somebody that's in incredible shape, like you know, boy, I'm just kidding. But somebody that's actually in good shape, that's a runner or a marathoner or even a cyclist, somebody's got good cardiovascular endurance, they might actually have developed a S3 because of just how strong and how fit their heart is, right? And these type of people that are in really good shape, they might actually have a slower heart rate than the rest of us. Their heart don't have to work as hard to, pump blood throughout the rest of the body. All right, so S4, moderately pitched sound that occurs immediately before the S1. So something that hits before the normal love dub. So it is a sound that is right before that sound. It's usually increased to stiffness in the left ventricle because scar tissue's formed, or it could be that coronary artery disease has started to form. It's not a good thing, but again, the best way to recognize these bad boys is to know what normal sounds like and to at least call attention to it. I'm gonna be honest, there's been some times I heard something strange in the heart. I'm like, you know what? That's like nothing I've ever heard. You know what? I'm gonna snitch anyway. I'm gonna tell the doctor, hey, I heard something strange and I couldn't identify it. And to be honest, on an ambulance, guys, it's loud. That diesel engine is making the whole thing shake. And if you're on the highway, you can't hear because of that. I'm telling you, working in Atlanta, there's a lot of loud noises. You get used to the gunshots and stuff, but it's hard to hear sometimes lung sounds and of course heart tones. So if you get if somebody asks you if they can get you a graduation gift, don't be asking for any Raptor shears or anything stupid like that. Get yourself a really, really good stethoscope. A really, really good stethoscope. If you're going to spend money on anything, spend it on the stethoscope. I want you to better hear a cricket fart from 30 miles away stethoscope. Get you a good stethoscope. That's where the money's at. That's where a real good provider can be made. Again, sometimes you can't hear very well with those El Cheapos. Get you a good one. There are other abnormal heart sounds that I'm going to talk about a little bit. You got the murmurs, the bruits, the clicks, and the snaps. And again, with all that noise going on, you may just be able to understand that there is a abnormal sound going on, and bringing attention to that to your paramedic that you're working with, or of course the hospital staff that you're transferring patient care to. Just letting them know, hey, I heard a weird sound in there, and we need to check that out too. These sounds may be heard when auscultating the heart, the great vessels, and they would be abnormal. Again, pattern recognition is the way you find these things out. Let's talk about the cardiac cycle now. So the cardiac cycle is the repetitive pumping process that begins with the onset of cardiac muscle contraction. It ends with the beginning of the next contraction. And the myocardial contraction results in pressure changes within the cardiac chambers, causing blood to move from areas of high pressure to low pressure. So that brings me to systole versus diastole. We're now talking about blood pressure, right? So blood pressure is expressed as a fraction, the top number versus the bottom number. I know this is the EMT-B class, but every one of you has probably at least had your blood pressure taken at least once in your life, right? If you have not, please email me. So our first lab can be me doing one on you, you doing one on me. So systole, that is your top number. It represents the contraction of the ventricular mass with its pumping, its power. So it's really measuring how much pressure your blood is exerting against those artery walls when your heart beats. The higher the number, the higher the pressure your heart is putting against artery walls. As you can understand, with any kind of pressure system, over time, it could be damaging if that high number is, if that high pressure system is flowing through there, it can damage walls. Diastole is the relaxation phase. That's when the ventricles are refilling. So that is your bottom number of that blood pressure fraction, the relaxation phase of the heart. That is your diastolic blood pressure. Indicates how much pressure your blood is exerting against your artery walls while the heart is resting in between beats. Again, it's noted as a fraction. Systolic's above, the diastolic. Now, what about it? What is afterload? So I thought it was funny. I just had this last paramedic class I finished for the fire department over here. They just could not knock down afterload. But I mean, I asked it almost every test because there were still like 2 or 3 of them that kept like getting confused with preload. So afterload, let's start off on a good foot here, is the pressure in the aorta in which the left ventricle must pump blood. It is the pressure that the left ventricle has to push against. It's that simple. Just how hard, what does it have to push against? And the greater the afterload, the harder it is for the ventricle to eject blood into the aorta, which will reduce the stroke volume. And I found this picture here and I thought he was pretty good here. So to really make things simple, preload is the volume of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. That is the refilling pressure, the stuff coming back into the heart. And again, afterload is that resistance that the left ventricle must overcome to circulate blood. The afterload can be increased in hypotension, vasoconstriction, and hypertension is high blood pressure. And vasoconstriction is when the veins and arteries and all that means they're constricted, they're more narrow, which means it's harder to pump through a more narrow conduit. So cardiac output, we've reached it at last. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped through the circulatory system in 1 full minute. It is expressed in liters, and cardiac output equals stroke volume times heart rate. Cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate. So how does that affect me or you? So let's talk about it. So if I have a patient with a very, very slow heart rate, if their cardiac output, which is the output required for them to meet the metabolic needs of their body, the blood flow perfusion status. So for them to meet the blood flow needs of their body, there has to be a certain amount of heart rate. There has to be a certain amount of stroke volume, which is how much blood is being ejected out of that left ventricle to meet the demands of the body, right? So if they got a super, super slow heart rate and they're not going to have a good cardiac output, these patients will become, having signs of decreased cardiac output and hemodynamic instability. So they will be unstable based on their blood pressure will begin to drop. They might be pale, cool, clammy, indicating that they don't have enough blood flow. And these are the type of issues we're going to teach you guys how to learn and look out for. So big takeaway from this before we get too deep, cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate. Oh no, senor. I thought this was hilarious. So when we get to the cardiac labs later on, we'll teach you how to put on a 4 lead and a 12 lead, because it's my belief that you should be able to assist your paramedic and be very useful to them. So I need you to, if I'm busy doing history and drawing up meds, I need to know what that heart's doing. You need to put a 12 lead on. So what is a 12 lead or a 4 lead? Basically, guys, it is the stickers they put on your chest at the doctor's office or in the ER, and they're just going to take a look at your heart and see what it's doing electrically. It can let me know all kinds of things, whether the heart's getting enough blood flow, if it's enlarged, or if there's the presence of dead or dying tissue. So that these are important things for me to know, and I have to have a 12 lead to do it. And sometimes it's kind of inappropriate, and we just got to be very modest and treat our patients with respect. And again, if they can assist and lift their own chest meat, then that's even better, right? All right, so what about the blood vessels? These are the guys that carry blood, right? We got a couple of classifications here. Arteries, remember arteries carry oxygenated blood. Arterioles are the smaller version of arteries. Capillaries are who? They're very, very, very small circulatory system members here. The venules are small, small veins, and the veins are, the ones that carry unoxygenated blood. So arteries are the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. They get smaller as they get farther from the heart. They get smaller as they get farther from the heart. So circulation to the heart itself, we've got the heart that requires oxygen and nutrients. These are supplied via the coronary arteries themselves. So who supplies the blood flow to the heart itself? That would be the coronary arteries. Who drains the heart walls of blood? That would be the coronary sinus. So what about arteriosclerosis? Arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis are easily confused because they sound very similar. So arteriosclerosis, you ever painted something? Arteriosclerosis, art hardens, right? When you paint something, the art hardens, right? So arteriosclerosis is the hardening of the arteries due to the thickening of the vessel walls, hardening of the arteries. Now, your arteries are not meant to be hard. They're supposed to be elastic and be able to change and go with the flow kind of thing. They can constrict or dilate based on what your body needs. Atherosclerosis is narrowing of the arteries due to a plaque buildup. There it is, all that fried chicken I've been eating. The lowest chicken at Chick-fil-A gonna get me. Clay little lie. Worth it. So these two together will make up coronary artery disease. If somebody has coronary artery disease, they have developed arteriosclerosis, ART, hardening of the arteries, and atherosclerosis, which is that plaque buildup. So they got narrowing arteries that are hardening, and they're getting more narrow due to the plaque and lipid buildup. And here's a quick look at them too. I thought this picture would be helpful. So checking over here on the left side, we see that yellow stuff over there. That is plaque. That is erythematous plaque of lipid, fats that are building up over time and will narrow the diameter of your vessels. And again, all tissue needs blood flow. And if you've got that narrowing vessel there, the tissue that's behind that will begin to become ischemic, which means it's going to be in an oxygen deficit. There's not going to be enough oxygen for it to, really have a good survivability rate, right? It's going to start to become red, blue, purple, black, and die off. And here we got on the right side, see how much thicker these artery walls are? They're very stiff. It's hard for them to constrict or dilate and meet the needs of the body. Now imagine both of them together. There's your coronary artery disease. So taking a look at the systemic arterial circulation. So oxygenated blood leaves the heart through the aortic valve. All right, we talked about that, right? The last valve of the heart is the aortic valve. All right, and it passes into the aorta. Let's take a look at the picture here. At the top of the heart, there is a big red circly thing right here. That is the aortic arch, okay? As the left ventricle pumps blood out of that thing, it goes into the aortic arch. It splits a lot, but the main place it goes is this big red trunk here in the center. Can you see it? Let's see if I got something to point it out. Annotate, that looks useful. So this guy right here, can you see that? That'll be your aorta. Now, see how big that thing is? Pretty darn big, right? I'll go ahead and erase it. So imagine if somebody is shot right there. How long do you think they're gonna live? Not very, not very long. But as you can see, for every red artery you got, there is a blue vein that's gonna drain. So I got the aortic arch here that is going to, again, drain, receive blood from the heart and then spread it out and split it and go everywhere else. So that passes through the aorta and it takes it all the place it needs to go. Go ahead and just pop out of that. All right, what about circulation to the head and the neck? So we got carotid arteries. Everybody remember how to check a pulse? On the left side or the right side, there should be a carotid artery right through here on the side of the neck. It should take you at least 5 seconds, but no longer than 10 to check a pulse. Make sure you got a pulse. If not, call 911. All right, so the carotid arteries transport blood to the head and neck. Again, the head, neck, the brain, all that stuff still needs blood flow. It needs the blood flow that carries oxygen in it. It moves to the carotid bifurcation and the carotid sinus. So blood flow to the brain is very important. That is provided through the vertebral arteries and the internal carotid arteries. So we talked about the carotid arteries, right? Going through this way, coming from the heart, flowing this way, going up to the brain to give me that blood flow to the head. But there's also arteries on the back of my body right here that flow through my vertebrae, my vertebral arteries, right? My vertebral arteries. So the left and right vertebral arteries enter the cranial vault through the foramen magnum. We haven't covered skeletal anatomy yet, so I'll go ahead and tell you at your skull, right, has a big old hole at the base of it that your spinal cortex goes through. That big old hole also has other structures like the left and right vertebral arteries that go into the cranial vault, and they will then perfuse your brain and give it the blood flow and the oxygen and the nutrients it needs to do all this brain stuff like think. And then unite to form the basilar artery and the pons, the cerebellum, and the cerebral arteries. What about your carotids? They enter through the cranial vault through the carotid canals, and they give rise to the middle cerebral arteries. Those middle cerebral arteries then supply blood to the large portion of the brain cortex via the posterior cerebral, anterior cerebral, and anterior communicating artery. Now, all these guys connect to the point, right? So this interconnection of arteries form a collateral network to deliver circulation to the brain known as the circle of Willis. This is where they all come together. All right, your subclavian artery supplies blood to the brain, neck, and anterior chest wall and shoulder. Shortly after its point of origin, the subclavian artery gives rise to the vertebral arteries. And at the shoulder joint, it becomes the axillary artery. Below the head of the humerus, it becomes the brachial artery. So you've seen how this thing changes names as it moves down your arm, right? So let's take a look at them. So your brachial arteries, ulnar and radial arteries. All right, so we got them flowing through right here. So at the very top, get my little notator thing out again. Make sure you can see what I'm talking about, yo. So here's a subclavian coming through here, right? It's coming through the shoulder. As it reaches here, now it becomes the brachial artery, right? And as it reaches down, it becomes who? The radial and the ulnar arteries. What is it doing there? Well, it's perfusing the tissue of the forearm. It's perfusing the tissue of the hand. It's getting all that tissue, the blood flow it needs right there. That makes sense, everybody? All right, good. I'm gonna erase this if I mess up the PowerPoint. All right. So about circulation before we go into the pelvis. All right, so we've got to take a look at this picture over here. So remember that big old trunk, the aorta, that big red thing, that was a big old pipe? That thing will come down to the pelvis and split into a fork in the road. It becomes the femoral arteries. Those are big old arteries. The aorta divides into the two common iliac arteries. These arteries further divide into the internal iliac arteries and then the external iliac arteries. And then the femoral artery feeds off of that big trunk itself too. It goes down to the foot. The anterior tibial artery becomes dorsalis pedis artery. Now there is a pulse on the top of your foot. It's called the dorsalis pedis. Now, if somebody's, let's say, broken their ankle or twisted it, one of the things we'll do besides checking range of motion, remember that from the first lecture, is we'll also check for a pulse up there, because a simple twisted ankle that has no pulse in it has now become a issue of that foot not getting oxygen and blood flow. So this is one of the reasons that we, being thorough, will check for, range of motion. We'll take, the color, the temperature of the foot. Is it cold? Is it warm? Does it have a pulse? We'll check all that, kind of stuff when we teach you how to do assessments here soon. So again, as a rule, veins accompany any major arteries, and they're usually named pretty close together, right? They usually have a similar name. So remember, like the coronary arteries supply the heart with blood, well, the coronary sinus is what drains the heart of blood. Okay, so they all have similar names there. And then I don't expect you to remember every name there is, because I can tell you, I don't know all the names of them either. Head and neck, we got the external and internal jugular veins. The two major veins that drain the head and neck. And then we got the external jugular vein that joins at the internal jugular vein at the base of the neck. So these guys are doing what? They're draining who? The head, the neck, all this is being drained by the jugular veins. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about blood. It's not just a bunch of stuff running around there. There's actually a method to the madness. There is a component of blood that is just mostly water. There is a component of blood that is mostly red blood cells, and then there's white blood cells, and then there's platelets. All of them have a job and a function to do. So the plasma portion of your blood, that makes up the majority of your blood. Plasma makes up 55% of your blood. And your red blood cells make up about 45% of your blood. Your white blood cells, platelets, and all the other stuff makes up less than 1% of your blood. All right, so what does blood do? What is the composition of it? Let's talk about it. Blood carries oxygen and nutrients to tissues. It also carries cellular waste products away from the tissues. We spoke a little about the cells earlier. Cells require a bunch of different basic things, but in the main script, we're talking about just water, glucose, and oxygen. Now, as that cellular process goes on inside the cell, glycolysis occurs and out pops out adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy that we need to be humans. Through that process of breaking down glucose, there is waste products that is produced, and these cells, the blood carries that waste products away and gets it out of the body. So the plasma is watery, straw-colored fluid, accounts for more than half of the total blood volume. It's 92% water, 8% dissolved substances, but 55% of blood is plasma. Looks like it might be a test question. It might be, who knows? I guess you knows if you're following along with PowerPoint and listening to my super boring lecture over this. So what about the red blood cells? Their other name is erythrocytes. Red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. Red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. Make sure you knock that term down. Because again, sometimes when it comes to registry, they won't just say red blood cells, they will say erythrocytes. They mean the same thing, but terminology will make or break you. We have a medical terminology class coming up, and we will share that with you. But, you know, as a paramedic instructor and as an EMS instructor, to keep my national registry license, I usually just challenge the paramedic test. I go and retake the national registry. I retook it again April of 2020. And every time I've taken it, even though I've been a paramedic for quite a long time now, I see things I've never seen or heard of before. And it all comes down to semantics. Maybe in Nebraska, they say things a little different, you know, or maybe the terms are just a bit different. Or maybe I've seen words this long on that thing. You know what I'm saying? I had to just piece them apart. So when we get to the medical terminology, I want you to really, really pay attention and really understand what these terms mean, prefixes, suffixes, and root words, and to always be adding to your repertoire of known medical terms that you have. So red blood cells contain hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's job is to carry oxygen to cells. And they are made by the process of erythropoiesis, which is made by the red blood cells in the medullary cavity of the long bones. And we'll talk more about that when we hit the skeletal system. But the skeletal system has a lot more to do with other things other than just being, you know, protecting things. So erythropoiesis occurs in the skeletal system and the long bones, actually. So they got about 120-day lifespan, and cells that are destined for destruction decompose in tissues that are rich in macrophages. So your body will, you know, recirculate that cellular material and destroy them over time. 45% of whole blood is red blood cells. 45% of your blood is what? Red blood cells. What about platelets? Platelets are the small cells in the blood that are essential for clot formation. We need platelets to clot. If I was to, you know, stab one of you for, you know, getting a question wrong on one of my tests, you would bleed, right? And hopefully you would have platelets that would come in there and start, you know, the clotting cascade, so you wouldn't bleed, you know, to death. I don't want to kill you. I just want to maim you for missing a question. Totally kidding about that, but still, you need platelets to stop any kind of bleed or wound that you would have. So it's essential we have normal platelet levels. What about your white blood cells? The big takeaway I want you to take from this is what their job is. When we get to the paramedic level, we can talk about how they actually do their job and how we can get deeper into that. But at this EMT-B level, I want you to know that white blood cells, their job is to fight infection. Their job is to fight infection. All right, blood clotting, again, is a complex series of events involving platelets, clotting proteins in plasma, other proteins, including calcium, and it occurs following an injury to a blood vessel wall. You know, so blood clotting is a series of events that have to be working harmoniously together. All right. And I have spoken, Mandalorian fans. That was your lesson 2 of your circulatory anatomy. Of course, there is way, way, way more to it at different levels of this game. When you get to med school or PA school and other types of schools, it gets much deeper. Even paramedic school goes into a huge, heavy patho and anatomy thing. But today, we just wanted to lay a little foundation of what A&P is for the EMT-B curriculum and what, you know, we're expecting of you to know. So you are now responsible for all this material. And if you got any questions, please email me and we will go from there. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you. I'll go ahead and stop sharing now.